Autumn Floods is one of Zhuangzi's most popular essays. The stories were taught in school when I was a teenager, and I would like to introduce these stories that still offers me inner peace after so many years. What's also special with Autumn Floods is that it introduced what is the Way or Tao by telling stories. If you are also curious about what the Way is, then you should definitely read together with me. When autumn floods came, the Yellow River swelled so much that one could not distinguish between cows and horses on opposite banks. The river god, feeling proud of his vastness, traveled eastward and reached the North Sea. Looking at the boundless ocean, he sighed to the sea god, saying, "There is a saying, having heard 100 truths, one thinks no one can compare to oneself. This was exactly my case. I once heard some people belittle Confucius' knowledge and Boyi's righteousness. I didn't believe it. Now, seeing your boundlessness, I realize how dangerous it would have been if I hadn't come here. I would have been laughed by those who truly understand." The sea god replied, "You cannot discuss the ocean with a whale frog, for it is limited by its space. You cannot discuss ice with a summer insect, for it is limited by the season. You cannot discuss the way with a narrow-minded scholar, for he is limited by his education. Now that you have seen the ocean, you realize your insignificance. Thus, you can understand great principles. The waters of the world are nothing compared to the ocean. Rivers pour into it, yet it never overflows. It leaks away, yet it never dries up. It remains unchanged through seasons and unaffected by drought or flood. This is how it surpasses rivers. Yet I do not boast. I compare myself to the universe, receiving energy from the yin and yang. I am but a small stone or tree on a great mountain. Compared to the universe, the four seas are like puddles in a marsh, and China is like a grain of millet in a granary. Humans are but one of 10,000 things living in a small part of the world. Compared to all things, humans are like a hair on a horse's body. The 5 emperors succeeded each other, the 3 kings contended, the benevolent worried, and the capable worked hard. All these actions are nothing more than this. Boyi refused power for fame, and Confucius talked about it for knowledge. Their self-importance is like yours in the water." The river god asked, "So, if I consider the earth as great and a hair's end as small, is that acceptable?" The sea god replied, "No, things are immeasurable. Time never stops. Division is not constant, and there is no fixed beginning or end. Great wisdom sees both the distant and the near, so the small is not insufficient and the large is not excessive. It understands the quantity is infinite. It verifies the past and present, so distance does not confuse, and proximity does not hinder. It examines the full and the empty, so gain does not delight, and loss does not sadden. It understands division is not constant. It understands the broad path, so life does not please, and death does not trouble. It understands the beginning and end cannot be fixed. Humans know less than they do not know, and they live less than they do not live. Trying to understand the infinite with limited knowledge leads to confusion. Thus, how can one know that a hair's end defines the smallest, or that the earth and sky define the largest?" The river god asked, "The world scholars say, the most refined has no form, and the greatest cannot be enclosed. Is this true?" The sea god replied, "When you look at something large from a small perspective, you cannot see it all. When you look at something small from a large perspective, you cannot see it clearly. The refined is the subtlety of the small. The crude is the fullness of the large. Different perspectives lead to different understandings. This is the reversal of circumstances. The refined and the crude are matters of form. The formless cannot be divided, and the unenclosed cannot be measured. What can be discussed is the crude aspect of things. What can be perceived by the mind is the refined aspect. What cannot be discussed or perceived does not depend on being refined or crude. Therefore, a great person's actions do not harm others, do not overly bestow kindness, do not act for profit, nor disdain the lowly. They do not consider wealth as virtue or high status as achievement. They do not act out of love or hatred. Their contributions to the world are not for fame or fortune. They simply act to bring peace, which is why the Tao values timeliness. Understanding this means being in harmony with the times. Responses to events are not constant. They're not limited to one way. Thus, a scholar's skill is not uniform. There are times to act and times not to act. The difficulty or ease of matters, the urgency or slowness of time, the size of things, are all not constant. Therefore, the ultimate person takes no action, and the great sage does not create. This is called observing the universe. This is called not being self-satisfied, which is why one can achieve true satisfaction. Therefore, the Tao values timeliness. The parable comes to an end here, and Zhuangzi is telling us that all things in the world are constantly changing, time is constantly flowing, and human cognition is limited by conditions, with characteristics such as subjectivity, arbitrariness, and uncertainty. Therefore, judgments about things are distorted, just like those people in the world who think they're great, think they have a lot, and think they're valuable. They're just complacent in a false dream. Ultimately, although all things have their own nature, they're all manifestations of the way. Only the way itself is absolute. Only by following the way, one can adapt to endless changes and are not harmed by external things. Therefore, the author concludes at the end that one should not extinguish nature with human actions, not destroy destiny with intentions, and not sacrifice life for fame. By carefully guarding and not losing this, one returns to the true self, and this is precisely the main theme of the entire essay. Next, the author lists several parables to illustrate the main idea of the article and the Tao or the way, and in the next video, I will introduce these parables that are equally inspiring. See you next time.